The most famous lobbyist ever, Jack Abroff, has written a book called Capital Punishment: The Hard Truth About Washington Corruption from America's Most Notorious Lobbyists. His actions cost him 43 months in jail on charges of bribery and corruption. And we're going to talk with him about his ride, his redemption, and also a little bit about someone we know well in the heartland of America, Senator Byron Dorgan, who specifically is addressed in the book because he, of course, was one of those quite critical of Jack Abroff's actions, yet was also the recipient of some of the work and some of the lobbying efforts on the part of Jack Abroff's firm and colleagues. Anyway, the book, again, is called Capital Punishment. The author, Jack Abroff, joins us now. Jack, how are you?
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate you joining us. Is this as much a story about redemption as anything?
Well, I hope so. I've been through quite a process, and I'm hoping that I've come out on the other side a better man and, hopefully pushing for the right kind of things. You talk in the book a lot, and I remember this even at the time, hearing stories about your incredible generosity. Was that a product of some guilt of being in the middle of this swirl of how Washington operates and wanting to make sure that when you were benefiting, others less fortunate were benefiting? Or tell us a little bit about your charitable journey. Yeah, from the time I was a little boy, I was, let's say, addicted to charity. I spent a lot of my youth working for charitable enterprises. I talk in the book about the fact I worked for the Sugar Ray Robinson Youth Foundation in Los Angeles for a good portion of my high school years. Even as a little teeny tot, I raised money for senior citizen homes, so I kind of always felt the need to do charitable things, and obviously I've been less empowered to do so lately, but I've tried to do what I can where I can, and I think that doing all the charitable stuff, and my wife and I giving away about 80% of the money that we made, probably didn't assuage any guilt, because I didn't feel any guilt. I didn't think I was enmeshed in what I was involved in, and it probably did help, though, keep me from analyzing where I was, and that, in that respect, it was unfortunate.
So, in other words, in retrospect, you feel you were guilty, but you're saying when you're living it, when you're breathing it, you don't realize what you mean. You sort of justify your actions, or explain how it is that you didn't think you were doing anything wrong.
Yeah, I think you've put it well. I entered a world of political combat. Lobbying is political combat, basically. You're fighting on behalf of your clients. You get clients through hard work, and they have needs in front of the federal government, for better or for worse. And in my case, I would have a number of clients, and I had an attitude of winning is everything, and ultimately stopped seeing where the lines in the sand were drawn, and we were winning. We had a nonstop, an undefeated record. Actually, at the end of it, we had one defeat, but otherwise we had a pretty perfect record. We were making a lot of money for our clients. We made a lot of money in doing these very valuable things for them. I was giving about 80% of what I made away to charity. So with all of that going on, I actually thought I was not only not doing wrong, I thought I was one of the more moral people out there, and that just shows you how you can get skewed.
You became the poster child for, a system that was clearly broken. Has it been fixed since, everything was exposed as a result of your case?
Unfortunately not. I think what Washington does is when somebody like me comes along, it's kind of like an accident in the road. You see this accident as you're driving, and while you're passing it, you're looking at it, you start driving a little slower, and you start behaving, and then about a mile down the road, you're back to how you used to drive. And I think that's pretty much what goes on here.
Jack Abroff is with us. The book is called Capital Punishment: The Hard Truth About Washington Corruption from America's Most Notorious Lobbyists. You talk in the book about Byron Dorgan, and Byron Dorgan represented North Dakota up until November of 2010 for 3 decades. First elected to the House in the 80s and then later jumped over to the Senate. And he was part of the congressional investigation of you, and you quote him in the book specifically talking about his disdain for you, and then you point out the fact that he was a recipient. Now, he says he never met you. Did you ever meet Byron Dorgan?
I don't remember ever meeting him, but that's entirely irrelevant to the discussion. That's kind of like saying, did you shoot that guy? And, the answer being, oh, I never wear a red shirt. Yeah, I'd never probably met him, but that didn't stop him from taking about $75,000 from my team and my clients.
He said about you, he was both a liar and a thief. What we do know is that he was corrupt. That's what we do know. For him to allege corruption of others is pretty Byzantine.
Well, I mean, the FEC reports, the Federal Election Commission reports, are what they are. Mr. Dorgan received the money. Mr. Dorgan actually gave the money back, proving that he had gotten it. So, I didn't want to get in the book into sort of a personal he said, she said, but, where people have come out to try to live in denial and try to deny their role in things, I think it's important that it's talked about. I've had to live with and admit and come to terms with what I was and what I did. Other people in Washington don't want to do that, and they're going to have to just answer their own questions.
Here's what you said in the book about Senator Dorgan. You said, Byron Dorgan railed against the cesspool of greed, that was his quote, surrounding my practice. I guess it wasn't a cesspool when he had his hand out to take over $75,000 in campaign contributions from our team and our clients. Somebody asked the senator specifically about that quote. He thought you were just probably pretty upset with him because he helped lead the investigation that helped send him to prison. Was it about being upset about going to prison, or was it about just seeing rank hypocrisy?
Well, I wasn't upset about going to prison. I've written this book after I'm out of prison. It is what it is. I quoted him from his comments at the hearing. By the way, he didn't lead any investigations. He was at the hearing. He showed up and made his pejorative comments there. To respond that, well, somebody's a felon, somebody's a criminal, somebody's a liar, these don't answer the questions. The question is, did you take money from my clients and from my team? And the answer is yes. You had to respond. You had to file these with the Federal Election Commission by law. You did, which itself is an admission that you did it. Again, Byron Dorgan's out of the Congress at this point, and is going on to whatever he's doing.
Lobby.
I'm not lobby, of course,
Which he, by the way, said he wouldn't do. So, but literally,
90% of them do it, which is why I propose that it be banned. Because the fact is, this is one of the aspects of corruption that's there. And, with me, they love to say, we got Abroff. He was the bad guy. He was the corrupt one. Okay. The question I have is it cleaned up? Is it over? Jack Abramoff's not there anymore. What's going on? And obviously it's not. I mean, we hear things every day. We hear about the insider trading that's going on where they can legally take information, trade in the stock market, whereas if we did it, I'd go right back to prison, and you would go to prison, I presume, for the first time if you did it. So a lot of the system in Washington is messed up. I'm not as interested, frankly, in pointing fingers at Byron Dorgan. What I'm interested in is cleaning it up, undoing what I took advantage of, and I admit I took advantage of, and making sure that others won't do the same. And the only way to do that is to go after the system, not the individual.
All right, we'll talk more about that on the other side of the break. Jack Abramoff is with us. The book is Capital Punishment, The Hard Truth About Washington Corruption from America's Most Notorious Lobbyists. How does it work? And then what to do to clean it up. Jack Abramoff is with us, the most famous lobbyist ever, jailed for 43 months on charges of bribery and corruption. His new book, Capital Punishment, The Hard Truth About Washington Corruption from America's Most Notorious Lobbyists. Now wanting to talk about the way to fix this mess. I want to understand how it works. And we've been picking on Senator Byron Dorgan just because he was mentioned in your book and is now disputing some of the things in here and saying he never met you, as you said, which has very little to do with anything, given the fact that your colleagues, your firm, handed him some $70,000 plus in campaign contributions, which he obviously felt dirty enough about to have returned. So how does it work? I mean, in his case, he was the ranking member on the Indian Affairs Committee. You had a number of clients that were in Indian tribes represented by you. Are you giving Byron Dorgan money to reward him for previous votes? Are you giving him money to influence future votes? I mean, is it quid pro quo, black and white, or what, Jack?
No, it's rarely done like that. Generally what it is relationship building. These members ask for contributions because that's what they do all day. You know, the congressmen, they raise money. And we, as lobbyists, viewed it as partly our role to do that, to get them that money. And that helped build the relationship in the same way, by the way, that taking them to dinner and taking them to sporting events and taking them to play golf and taking them on trips all build relationships. And what a lobbyist does is try to build as many relationships as possible, secure ties in different offices so that when a fight comes up, when an effort comes up, you're able to call on these guys to help. And so he was somebody in that category. Byron Dorgan has, unfortunately, there were many, many others as well.
Dude, that doesn't sound corrupt to me. That sounds like good business.
Well, it's fine if it isn't business, but if they're public officials and you're providing to them all sorts of gratuities and contributions, frankly, bribes, it is corrupt. Now, it's not illegal, but that's the problem, that it's not illegal. It's not illegal because the people who are making these laws are keeping this legal, and this is the kind of thing the American people needs to rise up and stop, and then get them to cut it out.
Now, what has been done in the way of reforms, and what should be done? I mean, you're hearing about I've been to had meals with members of Congress, and they'll say, well, I'll say, hey, let me pick up the tab. Well, I could only do that if we're friends, and since we're friends, that's fine. I mean, are there all kinds of loopholes, or have they fixed some things as far as plane trips and whatnot? What have they done that makes sense, and what do they need to do?
Well, let's put it this way. They haven't done anything that would have stopped me or anything that stops any lobbyist who knows how to work the system. Each of these things are rife with loopholes. What they need to do, and what I propose in Capital Punishment in my book, are fairly draconian changes, by the way, that they're going to only make kicking and screaming, that cuts off completely the money roll in their lives. If somebody wants to go serve in Congress or in the Senate or serve as a staffer in these places, that's very laudable and very good. They should do it. But when they're done doing it, they shouldn't go through the revolving door like I guess Mr. Dorgan has and cash in and make money and become fabulously wealthy. So I propose that there's a lifetime ban on people making that journey between public service and cashing in. Number two, I would not allow lobbyists or people who are feeding at the government trough, the special interests, in many cases labor unions, and others, anybody basically who's got their hand in our pocket, the American people's pocket, any of them should be able to give $1 politically as a contribution. Because ultimately what they're doing is using their money to buy more of our money, and that has to be cut off. Similarly, that same group of folks need to be told that they can't do anything, not a meal, not a glass of water, not a pencil, no item, no gratuity, no service that could engender gratitude, which would change that official public relationship into something improper.
And by the way, they can go into things other than lobbying, but really do lobbying, right? Because I think Byron Dorgan, for instance, is with Arndt Fox, and I think he said, well, he isn't lobbying, but he's co-chair of their government relations practice. Well, that's lobbying, isn't it?
Oh, exactly. I actually just wrote a column for Reuters yesterday where I go into this and discussing the situation with Gingrich. People who come off the Hill, they think that we're all idiots, and so they say that, well, I'm not a lobbyist, I'm a strategic advisor. Well, what do you think a lobbyist is? I was, I guess, the biggest lobbyist. The amount of time that I went up and met face-to-face with congressmen was minimal. Most of the time you spend is in creating your strategies, creating your approaches, advising your client. And that's what these guys are doing. That's exactly the cashing in that I think America resents and is getting upset about. That's why we see the rise of movements for, like, obviously, Tea Party, some elements within the Wall Street group who are protesting. And I think that America's getting sick of these guys. They just can't listen. They're tone deaf to it. It took, by the way, a 2x4 across my head to pay attention. So I hope it doesn't have to take as much with them.
Earl Pomeroy, by the way, who was a 9-term member of Congress who lost to his Republican challenger, speaking of the Tea Party last cycle, he too has joined a big firm. Elson Bird is the firm, and, again, I forget if it's actually lobbying or if it's, some version of it, but, the games continue. I mean, it's a revolving door out of Congress, in there cashing in big time. And you believe that one change alone to say lifetime ban, you can't do it, you can't, whatever you call it, you can't go in there and influence policy and legislation would do more to fix the system than anything else?
Absolutely. How I phrase it, and of course it all needs work. You've got to be precise in your language with these things, and I'm not at that stage. But how I phrase it is basically you can't draw a paycheck from a lobbying company. You can't be the strategic advisor, the head of the government practice, whatever euphemism you want to use. If you want to do it for free, do it. But if you draw a paycheck, you'd be violating the law, and that's where we really need to get on that item. There are other things, too, like I mentioned. Additionally, by the way, even though I was against them when I was a lobbyist, term limits are essential to get these guys out of there, to get fresh blood in there. This is not what the founders intended.
Yeah, that's for sure. If you look back on your time lobbying, what do you feel the dirtiest about? What do you think was your worst offense?
Well, I think the worst offense was probably just an unlimited lavishing of anything that they wanted on these guys, so that I could position myself to get what I wanted. And, that as I look back is one of the many things I feel very squeamish about that I was involved. I look back and I'm unhappy with a lot of what happened. I'm not unhappy with everything. I did some good work, and the money went to good places and things like that, but I shouldn't have been there. I should have been thinking, and instead of just running to win.
Like, for instance, the issue that was at the center of your conviction was having Bob Ney, congressman who we know from Ohio, insert legislation benefiting a casino. The language of the legislation was, pretty inane, and the language was pretty vague, but ultimately, and a lot of folks probably wouldn't even know what it was for, but it ultimately helped them. Did the taxpayers get harmed in a deal like that, quickly?
No, the taxpayers weren't harmed, but the country was harmed because of that whole process.
Again, more reasons for reform. Very fascinating discussion. Jack, thanks for telling the story. Appreciate you joining us today on the program. All the best to you.
Thanks very much.
Jack Abramhoff, the book Capital Punishment, The Hard Truth About Washington Corruption from America's Most Notorious Lobbyists. Preview of tonight's foreign policy debate coming up next, and much more.